Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We extend a warm welcome to all of you for our webinar on the timely and significant subject of exploring the new ELV regulations and the circular economic initiatives presented by APA Engineering. Let's get into the presentation. Now, let's start with the housekeeping rules. All participants except the speakers are currently on mute. Please be advised that this session is being recorded and we will share the recording the next day of our webinar. Following today's session, there will be a survey for all of you which will be helpful for us for our future webinars. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to write to us at complaints@apaengineering.com. We will respond to your queries as soon as possible. Let's proceed to the next slide. Let's review the agenda for today's presentation. We will commence with an introduction of ELV directive encompassing its scopes and objectives, followed by an exploration of the current ELV directive's requirement, annex to application codes, vehicle type approval, the proposed new regulation and its key components, the timeline for new ELV regulation, and finally, a conclusion. Let's move on to the next slide. Allow us to introduce ourselves. I am Maniamai and alongside me is my colleague Renuga. Together we serve as a product regulatory experts at APA Engineering and will be your presenters for today's session. Moving on to the next slide. Before we explore the technical aspects of our topic, we would like to provide a brief introduction about APA Engineering. With over 2 decades of our industrial experience, we hold TISAX and ISO certifications. Our extensive suite of services encompasses compliance, engineering, sourcing, and software services. As a compliance firm, we specialize in delivering compliance services and tailored software regulations for a wide range of global regulations like IMDS, REACH, ROS, conflict minerals, and many more globally. Now let's proceed to the technical aspects of our presentation. Though we are aware about EU ELV, we'll recap it from the basics. ELV is end of life of vehicles. Every year, over 6 million vehicles in Europe reach the end of their life and are left abandoned, exposing to the environment. The inadequate handling of ELV vehicles results in loss in value and increase in pollution. A vehicle, irrespective of its age and its weight, it is made up of approximately 75% of metals, both ferrous and non-ferrous, and the remaining 25% of the vehicle's weight results from tires, fluids, and other compounds. When this goes to the end of life, the waste in turn becomes the reason for the emission of many hazardous substances, causing severe impacts to humans as well as to the environment. To tackle this problem, in 1997, the European Commission adopted a proposal for a directive, and the first EU Waste Directive of ELV is 2000/53/EC, which came into existence on 18th September 2000. Moving on to the next slide, we shall see about the objective of this ELV, current ELV. The main objective of the current ELV is to prevent and to reduce the waste quantity and the harmfulness of the hazardous substances in the environment. As we are aware, the ELV have triple R concept, which means vehicles need to be designed to enhance the proper dismantle and they need to allow components and materials for reuse, recycle, and recovery. For doing this triple R better, there is a need to increase in the number of ELVs treated in ATFs, that is Authorized Treatment Facilities, and IDIS, that is Improved Information for Dismantling and Parts. This will improve the economical performance of all economic operators involved in this ELV treatment. The economic operators here, they may be producers, distributors, collectors, the motor vehicle insurance companies, or they may be dismantlers, shredders, recoverers, or recyclers, etc. Let's move on to the next slide. Here we will be seeing about the scope of current ELV. The current ELV covers two types of category vehicles, M1 and N1 category vehicles. The M1 category vehicles are the cars with less than 8 passenger seats excluding the driver seat, where the N1 are the vehicles like the trucks having less than 3.5 tonnage of GVW weights, that is the gross vehicle weightage. Moving on to the next slide, here we will see about the requirements of current ELV. The ELV directive has two requirements basically: improving the recyclability of the vehicle parts and minimizing the use of hazardous substances. Those substances are lead, mercury, cadmium, and hexavalent chromium. The ELV directive requires OEMs and other stakeholders to establish several collection centers to collect the old cars and dismantle or recycle as per the directive listed standards and targets. And that requirements are meant to be in 2006, the percentage is about 80% for reuse and recycle. And for reuse and recovery, it's about 85%. It gets improved in 2015, where the target is about 85% of reuse and recycling, where 95% of reuse and recovery. In order to meet this regulation, the OEMs require all the suppliers to provide the detailed material breakdown analysis reports on the parts and assemblies they supply. We have maximum allowable limits for some of the chemical substances like lead, mercury, cadmium, etc. Moving on to the next slide, we'll see about what this Annex 2 is dealt with. As told in the previous slide, the ELV directive restricts some of the chemical hazardous substances in vehicles, but with some exemptions for the vehicles placed in European market after July 2003. Those exemptions are like, the allowable percentages are like 0.1% for lead, hexavalent chromium, mercury, and it's about 0.01% for cadmium. That is, some of the applications are permitted to use lead, mercury, and all above the allowable threshold limits, which were explained in detail in Annex 2 of this ELV directive. This Annex 2 shall be amended on a regular basis according to the technical and scientific progress. For example, now the exemption 8G, which is related to lead in solders, is replaced by 8G1 and 8G2, where a new exemption like 8K is inserted, which is related to the soldering of heating applications with 0.5 amps or more of heat current. Moving on to the next slide, we'll see about vehicle type approval here. The terms vehicle type approval describes the process applied by the national authorities to certify that a model of vehicle meets all the EU safety, economical, environmental, and conformity of production requirements before it gets authorized to be sold or registered or even entering for service in EU market. This European Union legislation provides the type approval as the whole vehicles or vehicle systems or as components and as separate technical units. That may be as a component wise or that may be as a system wise. Some examples are shown here. Like the vehicle prototypes are tested for the compliance with EU safety rules, for checking the installation of lights, for checking the braking performance, the stability control, and performing crash tests with dummies to check for noise and emission limits, as well as the production requirements of individual parts and components like checking for seats, steering wheels, airbags. There are many vehicle certification agencies or companies. Here we will see about ECWVTA, which means European Community Whole Vehicle Type Approved Approval. If any OEM makes large number of vehicles each year and plan to sell across Europe, then this European Community Vehicle Type Approval will be the best approval option. Every vehicle produced is then accompanied by a certificate of compliance, which is like the car's birth certificate, in which the manufacturer certifies that the vehicle corresponds to the approved type. Based on this document, the vehicle can be registered anywhere in Europe. Moving on to the next slide. Here, let us see about the pictorial representation of type approval process. Like, the manufacturer needs to provide the information related to the vehicle to be tested to the approval authority. They have to provide all those informations to the approval authority. They do many tests, and if the vehicle passes those tests, the approval authority provides the type approval certificate to those manufacturers. From here, I would like to hand over the presentation to my colleague. Thank you.
Good morning to all. I want to thank you all once again for joining this webinar. Myself Renuga, and I'm going to present you about new ELV proposal, their requirements and conclusion for the same. Before diving into the topic, it is important to understand why the new regulation was proposed and why it will replace two current directive. Let's explore the reason first. The lack of circularity in design and production. It made the automotive industry to depend highly on primary raw materials for manufacturing the vehicles and its components over the secondary raw material. Secondly, the poor quality of vehicle waste treatment. Everyone knows that when vehicle reaches its end phase, it will be transferred to a facility for the treatment. However, by the treatment process, waste is not properly recycled back into the economy, and the low quality scrap is recycled, which results in loss of resource for the European Union industry, including the lack of cooperation between waste operator and the manufacturer. The next reason is high dependency on imported raw material. Since the automotive industry is the largest consumer of raw materials, for manufacturing electric motors, it is highly dependent on imported critical raw materials, resulting in great economic loss for the European Union. The next reason is 1/3 of vehicles go missing. Around 3.5 million vehicles from the European Union are exported to third countries or disposed of illegally that are non-roadworthy, resulting in high pollution and traffic death, as well as the loss of resources. Finally, as we all know that existing law covers the M1 and N1 vehicle categories, but doesn't cover motorcycle, buses, lorries, which results in potential risk to the environment as well as the human health and a continuous loss of material resources. As a result, this year July, the European Commission proposed a new ELB regulation based on two existing directives. And this new regulation will replace the current directives such as ELB directive and RRR type approval directive. The overall objective of this initiative is to improve the functioning of the European internal market by reducing the negative environmental impacts linked to the design, production, service life, and end of life treatment of a vehicle. Its first objective is improving circularity at the design phase of a vehicle, which facilitates and increase the removal process as well as the recycling of material, parts, and components. The next is increasing the use of recycled material in new vehicles, such as plastic, steel, aluminum, and critical raw material. It reduces the industry dependency on raw material and it helps the industry to produce decarbonized vehicle At least a minimum 25% of recycled plastic should be used in new vehicle. The third objective is collecting more vehicles. It prevents exporting of non-roadworthy vehicles from the European Union. Thereby, number of missing vehicles can be reduced and it can be treated legally. And vehicles can be exported to third countries if it is roadworthy and the technical status of the vehicle is not ELV. Next is treat the waste in the better way. It increases the quantity and improve the quality of raw material. That reduces the environmental footprint linked to the waste management. Ultimately, it opens the market for secondary raw material and it facilitates the incorporation of more reusable parts into used vehicle, extending their lifespan at moderate cost for end users. Make producer responsible. As I said previously, the lack of cooperation between waste operator and the manufacturers leads to poor waste treatment. So to improve the treatment process, the manufacturer must take financial responsibility for the vehicle when it becomes waste. And manufacturer must provide incentive to waste operators. Finally, covering more vehicles such as lorries, buses, trailers, and L category vehicles, and gradually increasing their circulatory in the design, production, and end of life treatment of vehicle. It reduces the loss of resources and the collected vehicles can be treated properly. Next, we could go with the quick glance at the scope of this proposed regulation. As I said previously, the existing law covers passenger vehicles M1 and the light commercial vehicles N1. The remaining vehicles like two-wheeled, three-wheeled vehicles, lorries, buses, and their trailers are not covered under the existing law. Considering their eco-design and the management at their end stages, this regulation covers not only the vehicle categories M1 and N1, but also other L category vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles, and their trailers. This regulation has a few exemptions. Those are special purpose vehicles such as military vehicles, vehicles produced in small series, vehicles of historical interest, and vehicle category undergoes for multi-stage type approval. The upcoming slide covers the type approval requirement of this regulation. As per this new ELV rules, the new vehicle must meet the circulatory requirement of this regulation to get the type approval from member state authority. Let's see what those are. To improve the removal, reuse, and recycling of components and materials, new vehicle design should help the economic operator to dismantle the components easily without any hindrance, especially reusable components such as batteries, e-drive motors, engines, electrical and electronic components, wire harness, etc. Next thing is the new vehicle should be constructed in a way to achieve minimum RRR targets set out by this regulation. The current target for the reuse and recycling is 85%, as well as the reuse and the recovery is 95%. To achieve this target, vehicle manufacturer and their suppliers should develop their own design principle to improve the reusability and recyclability rate at the development stage of new vehicles. And manufacturers should design the vehicle in the way their components can be recycled and reused. Coming to RRR calculation, the rates of reusability, recyclability, and the recoverability should continue to be calculated based on the ISO standard, as in the RRR type approval directive, until the Commission establishes a new RRR calculation method. For the same reason, vehicles should be constructed and designed in such a way as to limit the presence of hazardous heavy metals and their recycled content to avoid adverse effect on human health and the environment. However, vehicles may contain hazardous heavy metals up to the allowable limit under some specified exemption in Annex 3. Here in the link, you can see the exemption. It is mandatory to label the components which contains heavy metals, including their traces also. Regarding exemption, the European Commission can modify, delete, introduce the exemption based on ECA report on the technical and economical feasibility of alternatives. The final requirement is about minimum recycled content in the vehicle. As I said previously, the low-rate plastics were recycled from ELVs. So to put a full stop to this issue and to increase their uptake in the new vehicles, the Commission sets a minimum target for recycled plastic, which is 25% by weight. It should be included in the new vehicle. Accordingly, the vehicle should be designed. For other materials like recycled steel, the Commission will set a target within the 3 years after the regulation entry into force, based on a feasible study, including economic assessment also. For other materials such as aluminium and critical raw material, the target will be evaluated in the future based on changes in automotive design and the availability of a recycling capacity. Along with this requirement, this regulation placing an obligation for manufacturer. Let's see those obligations one by one. The vehicle manufacturer must share the technical documentation showing the percentage of recycled material present in new vehicle. So it is mandatory declaration must be shared with the type approval authority. The next is the vehicle manufacturer should provide accurate, complete and up-to-date information on the safe removal and replacement of vehicle parts and components with waste operator via digital tool, which is circulatory vehicle passport, in order to improve the ELV treatment process. The next obligation is the manufacturer and their supplier should use component and material coding standards for labeling and identification of parts, components, and materials made of plastic and elastomers. With that, manufacturer ensure that all the parts and components of vehicles are marked, particularly labeling of batteries and of permanent magnets included in the vehicles. And also, the manufacturer should share the information regarding e-drive motors. And manufacturer has to verify that new vehicles do not contain any non-reusable components, example airbags. And finally, to get the type approval, the manufacturer must share the has to share the information with the type approval authority that their vehicle meets the circulatory requirement of this regulation. And also, the type approval requirement of regulation on approval and market surveillance of motor vehicles and their trailers and of system components and separate technical units. Then manufacturer has to share the circular strategy. It has to be updated every year or in case of any major change in vehicle design and production. Next, we'll see the time plan of this regulation. Currently, the Commission opened a feedback period for stakeholder consultation, which comes to end on this November, and it will publish the feedback in official website. Next, we'll see the conclusion. The EU ELV regulation is a significant step towards achieving a sustainable future in the automotive industry. And this regulation is expected to have significant environmental benefits, including a reduction of 12.3 million tons of carbon dioxide emission annually by 2035. The regulation will replace the current directives on ELV and the type approval of motor vehicles with regard to their reusability, recyclability, and recoverability. The EU transition to a circular economy will reduce pressure on natural resources and will create a sustainable growth and jobs. It is also prerequisite to achieve the European Union 2050 climate neutrality target and to halt biodiversity loss. Finally, the new requirement on minimum RRR targets, minimum recycled content, and the requirement of substance applicable to vehicle categories M, N, and O, especially M1 and N1 vehicle categories. As we informed you before, that we will have a survey session at the end. So please give your feedback if any improvement is required. So we will work on it. Since we are running out of time, if please drop an email to complaints@apengineering.com if you have any queries. We are happy to clarify your queries as soon as possible. Thank you. Have a great day.